So, good morning, everybody. What we're going to look at today is perspective drawing for design. And I know PJ has covered this with you last week a little bit so that you're up and running on it. So, today is just about a bit of a refresher. I know there's a couple of new people joining us today. So, I'm just conscious that I want to start from the basics and get through to a point where you can drive on with the exercises and drive on with your own development within perspective drawing. So first of all, what we're going to do today is just kind of a couple of instructions based on what we need you to do over the morning. So first of all, I'm conscious I'm surrounded by books and pages here. Um, you will have all been given uh, this booklet by PJ last week. If you haven't been given it, you'll be given it this week. But inside this booklet is there's a page on it. I'll just find that page there now. It's page 5. Um, and what we have are the ultimate sins. And there's a couple of things in that I just want to bring to your attention this morning uh, of what design is not doing when we're doing sketching. The first one there is drawing pictures. So right from the start, get into the habit of sketching for a reason, sketching to discover, sketching to understand. You're not sketching to keep me happy. You're not sketching to draw a pretty picture that you can hang up on the wall. This is a new communication device for you. So it's learning how to sketch properly and not draw pictures. The second one there of not filling in sheets, that's a real ultimate sin. These layout pages aren't cheap, and it always baffles me that students don't fill them. So get in the habit of filling your sheets. Um, the 3 and 4 there is just your general maintenance and care of your sheets. So making sure that you're not tearing edges or jagged edges or dog ears or no folding of sheets. So just get in the habit of using uh, just maintaining your sheets properly. Also using the correct equipment. So layout pads, layout paper is what we want you to do, and we want you to have the correct pencils. So I'm just gonna move on with those. What pencils am I going to be using today? So these are the 3 that I generally use. Um, it's a 0.3, a 0.5, and a 0.7. Uh, they they're good pens. They work really well. I generally sketch with the 0.3 because it allows you to create a really fine line. I'm using a HB nib, um, and what we'll do is start using the other ones then to differentiate between line weight and so on. But what you need to do is just practice with uh, your own leads and to see which are dark, which ones are bright, and make a decision then. If you're drawing too heavily, you might need to get a harder nib. If you're drawing too lightly, you might need to get a softer nib. So start with the HB and work from there. Okay. Now, the one thing that I want to get you all up and running with and get in the habit of is warm up. So just before uh, when we started this morning, I was just got a sheet and started just throwing down some sketches. And what it is just about getting your hand moving and getting uh, this kind of movement that it becomes a natural um, feeling, a natural exercise, so that you're not struggling the minute you start sketching. Um, I don't know if there's any golfers out there, but when you go golfing, you're generally trying to have a couple of practices before you head out, just to make sure that your swing is going naturally and comfortably. It's the same thing for sketching. So what I would suggest before this class every week, spend that hour or half an hour beforehand. Just take out a couple of sheets and just start doing a bit of perspective, cubes, ellipses, beginning to understand the ellipses, getting it moving. Nobody's ever going to see these sheets. So it's just about getting your hand moving and then ditching them, putting them aside, so that you're ready to start sketching today. Now, what I want you to do as part of this process is sketch along with me. So when I'm sketching, I want you to do similar, just so that you have the stuff that I'm talking about, but also that you're getting your hands moving as well. So there's a couple of things that we're going to talk about perspective first. So our understanding about perspective, and this is going to sound like a bit of a shock to some people, but perspective drawing is actually a bit of a cheat. It's our interpretation of how we see something. It is impossible to put stereoscopic vision, which is our eyesight, onto paper. So it's just not capable of doing it. So what we do is if we have come up with these processes called perspective, and it's usually 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, or 5 point perspective, and we make products believable that they're in 3 dimensions. So how do we do that? So the start point today is we're going to look at our planes and our axes. So just make sure you have a lead out, and I'm just going to draw in a couple of planes here. Okay, so I'm sure you've all seen these before, and these lines here are known as axis or axes, AXIS. So this one would be the z-axis. This one would be the x-axis, and this one would be the y-axis. And generally, we try and color code them just at the beginning, just to make sure that people can tell the difference. It can help with when you're doing vanishing lines, as we're going to come across in a minute, that if you're confused which lines are going where, that you begin to understand. Now, in 2 point perspective, and that's what we're really going to be looking at today. It's the one that designers use a lot. This z-axis here are going to be our vertical lines. And in 2 point perspective, all those lines are parallel with each other and perpendicular to a horizon line. I'll go through that in a little bit more detail later. The x-axis will go back to one vanishing point, and the y-axis will go back to another one. So these ones are variable. They're never going to be parallel. So on top of that now, what we have are planes. And again, this one is to do, I'm just going to draw a straight line down here just to make sure we're keeping it centered. Okay, so that is the Z plane. We have this one here, which is our Y plane. And we have this one here, which is our X plane. Now, a very handy way of remembering these is your x-axis is always perpendicular to your X plane. Similar, your y-axis is perpendicular to your plane, your Y plane, and the z-axis is perpendicular to your Z plane. Now, that sounds very basic, but you will be surprised of how useful that diagram is going to be to you when you start doing 1 or 2 point perspective, 3 point perspective, and then when we're getting into drawing more complex forms. So let's say, for example, if you're drawing a kettle or an iron or a car, these planes, you will be drawing on planes rather than axes. And so understanding these is going to be really, really important. So they're what we are known, they're known by coordinates. And when you start using SolidWorks, you're going to start seeing those appear and you'll be drawing with those, drawing on planes and so on. So what we need to look at first then is our terminology. What terminology are we going to be looking at today? So types of perspective. There's 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, and 5 point. Oh, sorry. Now, I'm going to put a little dotted line across this because 5 point perspective is something that we generally don't look at on the program. It's a view that is best described as a fishbowl. You know, when you get really up close to a product and it starts forming and curving around, that's a 5 point perspective, and generally we don't cover it. There's no need to. It's used predominantly in automotive design and in architectural design. So again, if you want to go look into it, I'll give you a reference that you can go and look at it in more detail. For today's purpose, I'm going to show you mainly 2 point perspective. We will use 1 point perspective, and you'll see that's used on interiors of rooms mainly, and you usually start off with a front-on view of your product. So if it's a cube you're drawing, you're going to be starting with a square. With a 2 point perspective, what we're going to be doing is usually starting with an edge. So if you can imagine your cube, with a 1 point perspective, you're going to be starting with a face. That's that one. With a 2 point perspective, you're usually starting with that center vertical line. That's what allows us to get our vanishing points going back. And with 3 point perspective, you're usually starting with a point, and it's usually that point in here. So I'll just put an arrow down, because then you have your 3 axes. So your Z axis, your Y axis, and your X axis. And that's the best way of looking at what we're going to be doing today. So other terminology that you're going to come across today, you're going to be coming across a thing called a horizon line. Okay, and the horizon line is just the line across between, let's say, the sky and the land, and it helps us with our line of vision. And I'll explain out that a little bit in more detail in a minute. Other things that you're going to be looking at are, we're going to have points at either end, which are known as vanishing points, and we usually write down as VP1 and VP2 in relation to 2 point perspective. So they're vanishing points, and then we have what are known as vanishing lines. And vanishing lines are any line that comes from these vanishing points and run through and intersect with our product. So that will be a point then on it. And again, I've just switched to the 0.3 just to get a lighter line in for construction line. And again, that's something that you want to do. Now, the other thing that we're going to be doing is looking at a thing called drawing width. So again, I'm just going to do a very rough image in here. And usually what that is, I'm going to draw a circle around it. That is referred to as your drawing width. Now, some people always say, well, how do I know what size to draw my perspective? Well, there's 2 rules of thumb that I like to put together. There's a couple of books to talk about it. And there's 2 that I think are actually really, really good. One is that drawing width compared to the length of the line should be 1 in 5. So the width of that is the equivalent of 5 lengths of that. Okay, or this line here is 5 times that. That's one of the best ways. At least then you know you're drawing in the correct manner. So usually what happens is the smaller you draw this horizon line, the smaller your drawing is going to be. The other thing that we always say to students is don't draw small. So in other words, if I start doing little cube here, I always say to students that is useless because number one, you can't see the detail. And if I had to put an ellipse inside that, again, it's starting to get very crowded and you can't really see it. So draw big. The other thing I would always say as well is that if you take that and now explode it up, so take a photograph of it and zoom in on it, it becomes less and less and less like a cube than you originally thought. However, if you draw something extremely big and much bigger than this, and you start reducing it down in sketchwork, then it starts looking better and better and better and better. And that's just a little trick designers use when they're doing presentation drawings. You'll find they'll actually draw a very big diagram or a very big image of the product so that when they bring it into Photoshop or in, they can actually reduce it down in size and it's just getting better and better. So that's a tip that you want to just be sure of. That people are like the cone of vision. Now that cone of vision is something that is to do with this. So if we have Jimmy here and Jimmy's looking in that direction at a product, whatever that product is. So that's direct line of sight. Okay. This is the plane. And where that plane line of sight meet, that's your horizon line. So normally what happens is if that is 90 degrees, then what you have is a 2-point perspective. If you change that angle, where you're actually looking down on a product or looking up at a product, you've changed that angle, that leads you into 3-point perspective. Okay, so generally we're going to start with this one, just again to the basics. Now, the cone of vision that we talked about up here relates to your field of vision. So in other words, are you drawing? Is that the image you're drawing? Is your image that size? And that's your angle. So is that a 35 or a 40-degree angle of vision? And again, that's going to increase or decrease the size of your drawing that you're going to be doing. So I'm conscious that I'm doing a lot of examples of the theory behind it. And again, this is going to be of great benefit to you when you're drawing. So what we're going to do is take this aside. We're going to grab a new page and we're going to start doing some of the theory on 2-point perspective. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to draw a line right across your page. I don't want to see little small horizon lines appearing all over a page. Just deal with one horizon line and we're going to put everything back through that. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. You need it if you're comfortable, just draw the line straight across, or if you're not comfortable with it, draw vanishing point 1, vanishing point 2, and join the dots as we discussed last week. Keep it around the center of the page and a nice confident line right across. Put a dot here and a dot here. So this relates to the vanishing point 1 and this relates to vanishing point 2. So again, that's a very good distance. So we know that when we're drawing 1/5 of that line, so I would imagine about that gives us the size that we should be drawing our cubes. Okay, so let's start with the basics. I'm going to draw in, what are we trying to do? We're trying to do a cube. So let's look at the makeup of the cube and reference back to our axis and planes as we go. So as we said, with 2-point perspective, this is the line we do. As I said to you earlier, I'm going to start bang in the center between vanishing point 1 and vanishing point 2. And I'm going to draw a line, a vertical line. Okay, now that vertical line, you know, it's 1/5 is the size of the drawing we're going to be doing of that overall line. So that's approximately right. And you're going to get a lot of this with design sketching, which are approximations or guesstimations. Our role as sketchers is to sketch quickly to discover, not to do pieces of art. Okay, so yes, if I got a ruler out, I could make this perfect. But as I read in one of the books recently, sketching, freehand sketching is like, let's say, why we find individuals attractive. We don't find perfect symmetry attractive in individuals. It's actually the flaws in individuals that we find attractive. That's what attracts us to other people. It's similar with your sketching. It's those little flaws in it that bring your drawing to life. Whereas if you use a ruler, it's going to flatten it. It's going to appear dead. So that's why we don't use any rulers in relation to this. So now what we have is our first line. We've drawn this line in. Sorry, just move that down so you can see it. We've drawn that line in. Now, what's important about this is this line and this line and this line are all appearing on the z-axis, or they're all following the z-axis. That means in 2-point perspective, they must be parallel and perpendicular. To the horizon. So in other words, straight up 90 degrees off that. That is your z-axis. Now, again, you're into guesstimation. I'm going to guess that's roughly the height or the length of that box or that line. Now, what we have now is we can switch to either the x-axis or the y-axis. So in this case, let's say the x-axis, that's these lines here. Okay. Now, the x-axis all go back to vanishing point 2. Now, if you look here, we have 2 points already here that we know can go back. So draw back. Again, draw from this point to this point. And it's one of those things that you just have to get into the habit of. Usually just going a few lines, hovering, gets your hand moving in the right direction. Okay, and move it across. And again, similarly. Okay, and you'll see what I'm beginning to do is when I'm drawing this down, I'm kind of fading away just as I'm getting to it. And again, from here to here. And you'll get into the habit of it that way. Again, trying to just tone these lines down a little bit as you go. I'm drawing them a little bit heavy here just so that you can see them. But when you're sketching them, really begin to tone them down because they're construction lines. They're important, but as I say, they are construction lines. Now, what I've done is I've drawn this bang in the center of your vanishing point and your vanishing point 1 and vanishing point 2. That means that the distance of your cube is going to be the exact same. So the line going across here, if we draw a line horizontal, parallel to that, wherever it touches here, we draw it up, it's going to be the exact same. Now that only happens if you're bang on center here. So what I'm going to do is again get into the guesstimation. This is where a lot of people come unstuck, because there is what's known as a phrase called foreshortening. And foreshortening is, I know what width this is. If it's a cube, it's the same as that length. However, because it's going in perspective, it's going to be shorter than this. And this is the big kind of discovery in the Renaissance, where they actually worked out that's near and that's far away. While it sounds basic to us, this was revolutionary. So you get into the habit of guesstimating that. And I know that that line here now is shorter than that line, just because it's been foreshortened with our distance to travel to here. Now, remember what I said, if I draw a horizontal line across here, very roughly, put that point in and draw that one vertical. Now we have our cube. And probably should be a little bit more out here, but I'm going to leave it at this for now. Now we have more points. We have this point and this point, which is the equivalent, sorry, of this point and this point. Okay, where do they go? Back to the vanishing point. So again, I'm not drawing it fully back. Okay, now there's your cube. And usually what I try to do is I jump down to a bigger nib, and I go around the box. And it's just bringing it to the surface. That line's dark enough over there. Okay, so what you have is your cube. Now, what some people you'll see doing is just going over the inside lines a little bit, but not making them as dark, and that's just to contrast the lines. And it's just to highlight them. Okay, so that's a good example of a 2-point perspective. Now, how it begins to change, and this is what we're going to look at now, is another phrase called point of view. And you'll see it referred to as POV. Okay, now the point of view is very much determined by the angle you're drawing it, the position you're drawing it, and its relationship to the horizon line. So in the case of a cube, and we're just going to stick with a cube today. Let's get the basics right before we start drawing ellipses on it and all that type of stuff. So this time I'm going to stay on the in the center so that we know what we're dealing with, and I'm going to draw in another line. This time what I've done is I've drawn that same line here, but now it's going across the horizon line. So it's a bit above the horizon line and a bit below the horizon line. And again, I'm going to bring those back to the horizon line. And you'll get into the habit of, all right, let's get that one a little bit better, that they're roughly going back. Now you can just get into the habit of drawing them back, so you just make sure that they're right. But what will happen over time is you will have a vanishing point in your head where these are all drawing to, and it could be 100 millimeters, or maybe even 100 centimeters off your page. So you won't be able to draw them down. Again, I'm going to put in my lines. These are my verticals. So again, they stay parallel. Now, what's happened here? The last time I could bring these points also back to the X and Y axis, but you can see they can't go back. If they go back, we can't see them. Now, if you're doing building up complex shapes, I'd ask you to draw in that line as well, so that you can actually begin to see it, and just do it as a dotted line. very, very lightly, so that just shows the construction. So in other words, if I was doing a cylinder, I'll be able to do the cylinder inside that box. But what you can see now is I can't see the top of the box and I can't see below the box. Now, this one here is generally the view that we would use if we're doing a house, something of that size. So if you can imagine, we're standing and our viewpoint is the horizon line. That part of the house is below the horizon line and this part is above the horizon line. So it gives us an idea of that perspective. This one, however, is we can see the top of the box and both sides. So this is something that we look down on. So imagine if I was doing a cup or a kettle. This is it's a standard viewpoint or point of view for that type of product. So again, we're going to do another one. This time, staying in the center again. Just do it same size. And again, habit of drawing back through the horizon lines. So again, just get into the habit. When you're doing this area, that one's gone a bit wrong, so I'll just go back to it. Okay. Draw those back. Again, our vertical lines, which in 2-point perspective, again, are parallel, all on the x-axis. Now, again, this time we can't see these ones, but we now can see the bottom ones. So again, we can throw that in. So draw that back to the vanishing line. And I'm just going to do something here now that I'll discuss with you in a minute. Now, that's a little bit, make it a little bit more shallow. Now, what you've seen me doing here is if I was following these lines religiously, I'd cut through that. And then you have drawings going over drawings. But in this case, in order to create a little bit more depth, I've just truncated my drawing here and here. So it looks like that this box is actually in relation to this box, but sitting above it, gap between it, so we can't see the back of it. Again, it's just another little trick that we use for filling a page and making sure that we're using everything. But it also helps you jump the drawing off the page. Now, again, what we then tend to do is to bring these to life. We can do a thing called silhouetting. And silhouetting is where you're drawing around the outside of the shapes, just making a good dark line, as PJ refers to it, a consistency of line. Sorry for anybody that's watching this video. PJ is one of my colleagues. But you can see now this shape is really starting to pop. Also, if you wanted to add a little bit of shading on it, we're going to say imagine, and we'll do this again later. We're just going to use a slight crosshatch. Now, obviously, there's a whole other video in shading and bringing stuff alive, but all of a sudden you can begin to see these shapes are beginning to pop. You can see now a real good example of viewpoint. Now, there's a few other things that I want to show you, and that is the changing of the position. So in other words, we're going to move this over here. So there's our vertical line now. Now that makes these lines here really, really easy because you're not actually having to travel any great distance. Okay, so that's going back to there, but these ones now are much bigger. So again, it's just getting your hand moving, and if you draw this full line, you're going to start going across layers, and I want you to fill this page full of drawings when you're doing it. So get into the habit of just truncating that line. You know it's going in the right direction, and you don't need all this line, you just need this. And again, just get into the habit. Where is it going to? Okay, and again, I'm just truncating it. Now, what's really important here now, we're not in the center of this horizon line. We're out here to the side. That means that this plane, which is the Y plane, here, just jump up here again. This plane is going to be much bigger than this plane at the side. That's something that you will see and you will hear referred to as, again, as I have it up here, as foreshortening. And again, it's about knowing how and when to do that. So again, I'm going to judge this. This will be a little bit longer, still a little bit shorter than this line. So what we're looking at is the distance from there to there should be a little bit shorter than that line, but not the same. So again, I'm going to guess it. I'm going to draw on that line. Now, what we have now is our face. That's the Y plane face. Looking in at the box this way. Okay, so again, we have that line going back. We have that one. We don't have this one going back. So again, just let's draw that in. Okay, so that's our next vanishing line. Now, there's different ways of working out this thing. You'll find designers, I'm at this a long time, and I would begin to guess that foreshortening because I know it's going to be much shorter than that line. Usually what I find when students begin this process at the beginning, they'll make it a little bit too long, and what you get is a very elongated form. It's not a cube anymore. So look out for that. And what you're developing over this time is what's known as your critical eye and critical thinking, where you actually look at your own drawing and go, actually, that's not right. What do I need to do to change it? So in this case, there's a couple of ways that we can do this. I'm going to use a smaller nib so that you can, these are construction lines, and I'm going to draw in corner to corner. There, and I'm going to do this one. Okay, now what that's giving me is a center point. Now, I know it's vertical, so that's that center point. And again, now we have this point here. This point, it's not a vertical one, it's running along this x-axis. So we need to bring that x-axis back to vanishing point. So again, nice light line, but this time what I'm doing, instead of starting here, I'm starting beyond it. Why? Because I want to extend it right out here. I want to get a center point here. So I'm going to be drawing from here over to my vanishing point, but making sure I'm going through this. So, okay. Now what that does, it gives us a center point, center point, center point, center point of our shape. And you'll also begin to know that it gives us 4 equally sized cubes in perspective, or squares, sorry. Now, the best way of working this out is that if you draw a line from there to there, and continue it down, what you have is half that line. You can now extend it up. So when you look at that, you're going, that's far too short. That's because it's only half of it. But what we have now is our line here and this one here. Okay. Now, what's a little bit confusing here is this line going back. But remember, that line relates to this form here, not this one. Okay. So that's our center point. So we can bring that back to our vanishing point. Now, what that does, it gives us another point. It gives us that point, which is the equivalent of the center of this side. We have this. Now, if we draw a straight line between that point and our center point is just off there. So there it is. We now have another point. And I can draw that in as a vertical line. So that's the worst vertical line ever. So that's it. Okay, again, I'll just straighten it up again slightly. So again, now what I've done there is, because I'm drawn lightly, I've did it wrong. I did it wrong. I did it right. There's a tendency in this in the education systems that we all go through that we'll look at this as going, that's wrong. And if it's wrong, it must be deleted. So don't worry about it. If you're erasing stuff from a page, you're wasting time. Just move on with it. And it'll be line weight that will differentiate that. We'll know that's wrong, but in time you'll get them a little bit more perfect. So in this, again, I'm going to get out the darker their nib, and I'm going to just draw around this box. So that's a really good example now of making sure that the foreshortening. Now we have this edge. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this one. This one goes back as well. So again, so what we have now is a foreshortened cube or foreshortened side here, which makes sure that we do get a cube shape in perspective. So the beauty about this is that you have, in this case, equal sides. So in other words, when you're designing the product or trying to communicate a product across, if you're trying to show these two sides, there's equally as much detail on them, well, then that makes sense. Put it in the center and you're looking down on it so you can see the face. However, if you're doing a product, let's say like a small radio, where there's going to be a lot more detail on this face than there will be on the side of the product. So that means it's worth seeing more of this face than it is this face. And that's why we move it over here. In the case of something like this, it's obviously important to see the bottom of the product. So this is a good example of designing a product that we're looking up at. So for me, that one would be if you were doing, I don't know, let's the data projector that's in your room. Look up at it. See what it looks like. What about a light or a lamp fitting that's sitting up on a roof? That's the natural view you have of it. So again, that's how you would draw it. And then by moving it to the side and up and down, we'll change that approach. Now I'm just conscious of the time. So there's a few small little things that I'd like to do with you before we move on. One is, how do you know where not to draw on this page? Right, it's very easy. If you go beyond any of these vanishing points, you're going to warp and distort your form. So it's not going to work. So in other words, you can't vanish everything into the same direction. The other one is a rule of thumb. What I want you to do is look at that angle there. Okay, what is this? Just shy of 180. So what are we looking at? Probably maybe 160, 150 degrees. However, the further you move down, that point is decreasing. We're probably at about 110 there. Let's just write it in. That's probably about 110 degrees. Let's say that's 170. If we go down even further, drawn back to the vanishing points. Now, that angle there is getting close to 90 degrees. Never go below 90 degrees. If you go below 90 degrees, what you're going to notice is this warping of your shape. So it's like it's been stretched. So 90 degrees here, 90 degrees on the top, and keep it inbound of your edges. I like to kind of keep it no closer than that, or you don't get any closer to your vanishing points than that. It's because it's really been, the closer you are to them, the more it's going to vanish backwards. So there's more foreshortening on it, and foreshortening can be tough to manage. Now, again, this little trick that I with measuring out to make sure that it is right can be done on this one as well. Again, I'll use this. So if you stuff that is 4, 6 times equal distance, it's very easy to actually just draw those in like we did before and bring that back through our vanishing point. Okay, now with this again, a vertical line here. And we're going to go down through that. That's giving us another vertical. Which then gives us our line down through, which gives us that. Now, what that is an exact replica of that cube, but in distance. So in other words, let's say, for example, I was doing a product that had 3 pillars, 1, 2, and 3. I know they're equally spaced in perspective. So imagine you were designing, I don't know, a fence, some form of electric fence that had equally spaced intervals as you're going. I can do that along. Imagine you're designing a car. Usually with the car, we'll start with the wheelbase, making sure that the wheelbase is right. And the rule of thumb that I would generally use is 5 spaces, so the 1 wheel and 5th wheel back here. That gets you a good distance. So it makes sure that your wheel base of your car is perfect. Similarly, you bring that back over here and you can get the wheelbase on this side. And again, how that vanishes back through. So you can see this gets a lot more complicated as we go through. Now, I'm going to start finishing up here now. There's a few other things that I wanted to cover with you today, but I think there's enough in it. I suppose there's exercises that would be worth doing. Again, this book is the one that I've asked you all to purchase. I think it's a really, really good book. If you're learning to sketch like a designer right from the start. So just on page 30, and again, just flick through to it, is this exercise. And again, it's looking at a chair, but it's a basic chair. But this is a starting point of where you're going to get into a lot more complex stuff. But there's nothing new here than what I've just shown you. So it should be very easy for you to generate this. And this is something that I've discussed with colleagues, that I think when you get a task to work on 2-point perspective, it's the onus is on you really to start developing that skill and saying, right, do you know what, tonight I'm going to practice that. I'm going to make sure that I can draw that in 2-point perspective, and I go, where is it in relation to the horizon line? Where is it in relation to the vanishing points? So there's stuff now that you're going to have to think about. So that's sketching the basics. Other books that will be useful to you is this one. This can be got in the library, but again, Design Sketching by Olafsson is again some good examples of starting from the basics. I just find it there. Yeah. So just in relation to 2-point, 3-point perspective, I'll do some 3-point perspective with you next week. And again, just a breakdown of working out your distances. So that's a good book as well. And I think one of the ones that is proving very useful for students that are learning is Scott Robertson's book, How to Draw. Scott goes through it in a very forensic way, and it's just a nice to do, and it's actually quite inexpensive for the soft cover version of it. So that's it today. I think what from PJ's perspective of the brief that you got during the week, I think fill this page and remember it can go in behind here. So again, start a line maybe in here and draw a cube based on that, but you know it's way in the back. Again, stuff to the front starts popping out. Just be careful with your silhouette lines. Usually leave your silhouette lines to the last. If you don't, you'll end up drawing another product here and it just kills it. So Usually the rule of thumb with silhouette lines is if there's nothing behind it, then you can draw it in a good bit heavier. Okay, so that concludes our video today on perspective. I'm going to stop this video now and I'm going to answer any questions that you have. Okay.